You will serve your enemies in hunger and thirst, in nakedness and dire need. Deuteronomy 28:48. Something is wrong. You pray, you obey, you believe, and yet you're still stuck, still broke, still asking God, why is nothing changing? You tithe, you fast, you forgive, but the struggle keeps circling back. It's not laziness, it's not bad luck, it's not your lack of faith. There is something else, something ancient, something hidden, something spiritual, a force that locks doors, chokes finances, blocks favor, and it doesn't show up in your bank account, it shows up in your atmosphere. What the church won't say, what religion avoids, what most believers never see. There are curses still operating in the lives of believers, not because God is punishing you, but because a spiritual law is still active. This isn't about fear, it's about revelation, because hidden in this one verse is the key to why your life may be stuck. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll hear a prayer that thousands have used to break what has kept them trapped for years. This is not a message, this is a spiritual confrontation, and your freedom starts now. If this is already resonating with you, if something inside you is starting to make sense, take a moment and press the like button, not out of habit, but because it tells YouTube that this kind of biblical truth matters. It helps this message reach other believers who are quietly struggling just like you might be. And if this speaks to where you are in life, consider subscribing. This channel is for people who want clarity, depth, and real spiritual understanding, not noise. You're not here by accident. Let's go back to a man whose name most of us know, but whose struggle is almost always misunderstood. Joseph, the son of Jacob, the dreamer, the favored one who was betrayed. But let's not talk about the palace. Let's talk about the pit, because before Joseph ruled Egypt, he was thrown into a hole by his own brothers. Genesis 37:24 says, "And they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it." That phrase, "no water," is easy to skim over, but in ancient Hebrew culture, a dry pit wasn't just empty. It symbolized judgment, curse, and abandonment. In Hebrew, the word used for pit here is bor, the same root word used in Jeremiah 38, where a pit becomes a place of slow death. Joseph's pit wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. He wasn't just betrayed by people, he was thrown into a spiritual delay, a holding zone where his destiny was paused. Now here's the revelation. Archaeological findings from the Dothan region, where Joseph was thrown, confirm that pits like the one described were cisterns built to store water during droughts. But Joseph's pit was dry. Why? Because God was showing a mirror. Joseph was called to bring abundance, but he first had to face emptiness. And here's where it connects with you. Some of you watching right now, you're in a dry place, not because you're forgotten, but because you're being prepared. Joseph's pit was the beginning of his financial calling, not the end of it. But here's the twist. Genesis 39:2 says, "And the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a prosperous man." But wait, he was a slave in Potiphar's house. How can a slave be called prosperous? The Hebrew word used here is salach, to salah. It doesn't mean rich, it means to push forward, to break out, to advance through pressure. Joseph was still bound, but heaven had already unlocked him. That's prosperity, not a bank balance, a spiritual force that refuses to let you stay stuck. So while Joseph's brothers thought they buried him, God was actually planting him. While Potiphar thought he owned him, God was anointing him in silence. And while Egypt saw him as a foreigner, God saw him as a vessel of preservation for nations. The dry pit was never a curse. The prison was never the end. The silence was never God's absence. It was all a setup. And if you've felt like your life has been buried, if you've wondered why your prayers seem ignored, if your bank account says lack, but your spirit says calling, you're not cursed. You're in the process of alignment. This shows us one thing with power and clarity. Biblical prosperity is not greed. It is alignment with the purpose of God. Let's now shift from the pit to the pattern, because Joseph wasn't an exception. He was an example. The Bible doesn't just celebrate one story of breakthrough, it repeats a divine pattern, a standard of abundance that flows not from greed, but from godly alignment. Let's begin in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 8:18 says, "But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth, that He may establish His covenant." This is critical. It doesn't say God gives you wealth. It says He gives you power, the ability, the wisdom, the strategic insight to generate it. Why? Not for luxury, not for ego, but to establish His covenant, to fulfill His purpose through you. That's the foundation of biblical abundance. Wealth is not the goal. It's the result of alignment with purpose. Now fast forward to the New Testament. Luke 16:11, Jesus says, "If you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches?" Pause and think about that. Jesus draws a line between earthly wealth and true spiritual riches, but He does not separate them. He connects them. He says your stewardship of money, the most basic tool, is a test. If you mishandle finances, how will you carry the deeper assignments of the kingdom? That destroys the myth that poverty is somehow more spiritual. Jesus never glorified lack. He glorified sacrifice, generosity, and obedience. And every time He encountered someone in need, He didn't leave them there. He healed, restored, fed, multiplied, released. So no, poverty is not holiness, and prosperity is not sin. The difference is what rules your heart. Money is a tool. In the hands of the righteous, it becomes a weapon for good. In the hands of the wicked, it becomes a god. That's why 1 Timothy 6:10 doesn't say money is evil. It says, "The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." The moment money becomes the master, you've stepped out of alignment. But when it's a servant to your calling, to your family, to the work of God, then it becomes blessed. That's the biblical pattern. God gives power to produce. Jesus teaches stewardship before increase. The Spirit calls us to break idolatry and live in generosity. You don't chase money, you chase God, and money follows as a byproduct of your obedience and assignment. That's not prosperity gospel, that's covenant theology. And when you walk in that, your finances stop controlling you. Your fear breaks. Your faith takes ground. If this is making sense to you, if something in your spirit is finally seeing clearly, comment right now, "I receive," because when you declare that, you're not chasing hype. You're aligning your intention with biblical truth. I know what it feels like to believe in God and still feel broke, to pray with everything you've got, to give, to serve, to obey, and yet watch your bank account dip into red again. I've been there. And let me be honest with you, for a long time I didn't talk about it, because in church you're told to be content, you're told to be grateful, you're told that wanting more could be dangerous. So I buried the frustration. I spiritualized the struggle. I called it a season. I said God is testing me, while secretly wondering if I was just missing something fundamental. But what I didn't know, what nobody told me, is that the tension between faith and finances is not a contradiction. It's a calling. The desire to be stable, to break generational cycles, to tithe without calculating if you'll have enough for groceries. That's not greed. That's the cry of someone who's tired of barely surviving. That's the longing of someone who knows there's more, not just for yourself, but for those you love. And maybe no one told you this before, but that desire to rise, to build, to fund, to plant, could be evidence of your calling as a kingdom administrator. Because the kingdom doesn't need more broke believers. It needs wise ones, healed ones, prepared ones. I want to share something that changed my perspective forever, and I pray you write these down. These are 4 questions that helped me move from spiritual guilt to spiritual clarity. 1. Who taught you what you believe about money? Was it your parents, your church, a moment of trauma, a season of loss? Because if the source was pain, it might not be truth. 2. Have you ever asked God for a financial assignment? We ask Him for money, but have we ever asked, "Lord, what do you want me to manage?" What if your financial breakthrough is on the other side of a mission? 3. Can God trust you with overflow? Everyone prays for more, but more reveals what's hidden. Would more money make you more free or more anxious? 4. What's the story your money tells about your heart? If someone could look at how you spend, give, save, and invest, would they see purpose or would they see fear? Listen, if your heart is beating faster right now, if something in your chest feels like it's been hit, that's not pressure, that's confirmation. You were never meant to live under a curse. You were never meant to feel shame for wanting to be whole. You were never meant to serve God with your spirit and suffer silently with your finances. That tension you've lived with, it's a signal, a divine signal. And today, you don't ignore it. You listen, you lean in, because this isn't the end of your story. This is the moment God rewrites it. You will serve your enemies in hunger and thirst, in nakedness and dire need. Deuteronomy 28:48. That verse hit different at the beginning, and now maybe it hits even deeper, because you've seen what was beneath it. Not just words, but a pattern. a spiritual tension that many believers carry in silence, feeling faithful but financially frustrated, praying hard but living stuck, wondering why breakthrough feels delayed, distant, or denied. But now you know this isn't about failure, it's about alignment. There are covenant laws, spiritual principles, and unspoken beliefs that shape everything, from how you think about money, to how you pray, to how you expect God to move. So what do you do with all this? Let me give you 3 practical actions, starting today. 1. Speak life over your finances out loud. Every morning this week, declare verses like Proverbs 10:22. The blessing of the Lord brings wealth, without painful toil for it. Say it until your mindset changes, because your mouth is a gate. If you want to break the curse, start by changing what comes out of it. 2. Audit your atmosphere. Look at your closest conversations. Are you surrounded by scarcity, fear, shame, or by people who speak wisdom, abundance, stewardship? Curses often linger in environments that refuse to change. Create one that hosts alignment and clarity. 3. Ask God one dangerous question. What am I called to manage? Not just money, but mission, responsibility, assignment. When God reveals the answer, write it down, because that's where your provision is tied. Now listen, everything we've explored today leads to one unavoidable question. Does God actually want you to prosper, or have we misunderstood what biblical prosperity even means? That's not a simple question, and it's not one we'll answer with shallow cliches. It deserves truth, context, scripture, and in the next video, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. Because once you understand what prosperity really meant in the Bible, you'll never look at lack or excess the same way again. But for now, I want to know where you are. Drop it in the comments. I am ready. Say it boldly. Say it with expectation. Because something shifts when we step out of silence. You're not just watching videos, you're stepping into revelation. And this journey, it's just getting started. If you've made it this far, that already tells me something powerful. God is awakening something in you. You're not here by accident. This is the beginning of a shift, not just in your thinking, but in your spirit, your finances, and your assignment. So if you're ready to go deeper, subscribe now and become part of a tribe that's after wisdom, not shallow promises. Like this video if something opened inside you, if a verse finally made sense, if a weight lifted. And now to click on the next video, The Forbidden Biblical Code of Wealth. Why 99% of Christians never discover it. Because what you just heard was a wake-up call, but what comes next could be the blueprint you've been missing for years. Walk in clarity, move with courage, live on purpose, and remember, stewardship begins with understanding.